Hi, I'm Glenn Brooks. I want to welcome you to be on the Formula on the Unscripted Power Network. And I'm honored to have Rose Rivera with us. Rose, I want to say you're such a contribution to me on and off the air. Your questions, your inquiry, you. So I'm just happy you're here. I'm happy that we're doing this together. You know, in terms of the formula about health, I think that, and I was thinking about this because I had this conversation with my son yesterday, because I'm preparing to write him this letter. And I was just thinking that, you know, what I learned in my household to some extent was what we're going to kind of get into today, which is that symptoms are a gift, and that wonderment, this deep appreciation of life and being part of life, is fundamental to having a bigger life and experiencing another level of well-being. I realized growing up, I never heard about the bigger level of well-being or wonderment. What I experienced is that there were these symptoms. You know, I never saw my grandmother stand up. She was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I saw her at a hospital in a pool with a harness. And I think I just gained a lot of fears about health early on, because it just seemed like, oh, there's just medications and sterile rooms. Like, it seemed the opposite of wonderment. It was kind of endarkenment or deadment. There was nothing about this other energy or quality of life, other than my adopted father was very interested in the work of Dr. Wilhelm Reich, which was a lot about the idea that we gain armor, and that this armor cuts us off from the bigger energy of life, that we get armored as people. We get rigid in our bodies, we have tight breaths. And so that was in the backdrop, but at the same time, my father was taking a lot of medications. So at a certain point in my life, I got really interested in this thing called homeopathy, because the doctor who put that together, the pharmacist, a physician, he was asking questions about true deep healing and removing these layers of obstructions. So I guess I'm really honored. We have Dr. Nicole Cain with us. Sorry about that, Nicole. We have Dr. Nicole Cain with us. She's my homeopath. She's she feels like a deep family member. She is. I trust her a lot. And we're going to really dive into this series on the gift of symptoms and wonderment as a way of life, and discovering new levels of well-being, energy, and vitalness together. Welcome, Nicole.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Rose and Glenn.
Well, since I introduced that overview to Rose, I know your parents are a little different. What happened in your household? What did you take away in your household? Because we all start someplace, and now these days, there's a big rush to get to health. There's fear about getting this thing called health. And God knows the commercials now are more intense than ever. Every so often I watch tennis, and it's like Earl Jones was on, and he was trying to normalize this really intense diabetes product. And the symptoms are just dreadful, and they're playing in the background when someone's whistling. And it's such a different orientation. The orientation these days is that we're going to get these awful conditions. They have nothing to do with wonderment. They're degenerative and they're dangerous, but every time the medications sound 10 times more dangerous.
Yeah, so growing up around health, I had kind of an interesting experience, because I grew up in the Virgin Islands, where the pharmaceuticals, they really hadn't taken root yet. And so it was still a lot of traditional medicine based on plants and tinctures and herbs that are indigenous to the Caribbean. So those were the first go-tos in my background for when something was wrong, when you were sick, whatever the case may be. But then there was also very kind of stark, tragic things that happened, so to speak, in my family. You know, I had a grandmother, a great aunt, who they had strokes when I was little, and they both became paralyzed, so neither one could walk. My grandmother completely lost, I think it was her left side. Oh, no, her right side. She couldn't move and she couldn't speak. So I had, and then my grandfather, he really died slowly and horribly of cancer. So I had that as well, kind of in the whole thing. So I think the conversation that we're about to have today around symptoms being like a gateway, a doorway to much bigger health, if you pay attention to them correctly and you have the right perspectives, I'm really interested to hear what's about to happen, because I think there are symptoms that we have if we listen to our bodies and we don't tune them out with Tylenol or painkillers and things like that, but really listen, like, what is my body trying to tell me? Hopefully before we have major issues like a stroke or a heart attack. So that's what I'm interested and excited about for today.
Yeah, the interesting thing with Dr. Cain is that she's in the mental health field too, and I realize like so many people now are taking antidepressants and anti-anxiety that's kind of all over the place. I think they're reintroducing a new form of shock therapy. So it's a very, and more kids, of course, are getting oriented that they have ADD. So we're in this very interesting time of that symptoms are the enemy and the pharmaceuticals are the solution. So we're in between are the gift of symptoms and wonderment. Welcome, Nicole.
Such a pleasure to be here. And as you guys were talking, I was kind of reflecting on my own journey towards being a clinician. And it's so much the opposite of what I hear, Rose, you were talking about, is your family was very much oriented towards natural remedies and herbs and using nature as medicine. And I grew up in the Midwest, and the culture there is to trust your doctor and take your medicines. And as long as you don't have symptoms, life is good. And I found that there was a sort of element of complacency that was fostered in that culture. And complacency is familiar, and stepping beyond the bonds of familiarity can be quite challenging for a lot of people. And so even bringing to light this conversation, I can anticipate that some people might find it to be uncomfortable because it requires stepping outside of what I call the zone of reliable performance. Mm. And so what that means is we all have bounds within where we function, where it feels reliable and it feels safe and it's predictable. And we have a modern medical system that tells you this is how it should be, this is how you should expect to feel, and this is even the definition of how health is. And then the conversation that we're going to have together today requires that the person be at least willing to contemplate stepping outside of that zone and inside of the zone of what's called proximal development. And proximal development is in reference to when you push yourself just a little bit more outside of your comfort zone and explore what possibilities may be there for you in that journey.
It sounds expansive.
Yes. I think this conversation is going to be incredibly expansive, and my hope is that all of the people that listen to this can at least walk away with one thing that they can do. I love a program by Dr. Randy Carlson talking about intentional living. And what he does is he talks about what's one thing that you can do after whatever you've learned to make a change. And I think sometimes these conversations can be incredibly inspiring, but for some really overwhelming. And so my hope is that each person that hears this can decide at the end of the session, what's one thing that I can do to maybe step outside of my comfort zone and start to move towards making some real changes towards wonderment.
How would you define wonderment? It's such a beautiful word.
I use the word wonderment because it's something that Samuel Hahnemann, who, Glenn, you were just discussing, the founder of homeopathy, he used this word as an objective for health. He wrote a book, and it was called The Organon of Medicine. And the Organon of Medicine is broken up into different aphorisms, and each aphorism has a topic. And aphorism number 9 talks about the goal of health, which I think is absolutely beautiful in its language because it takes what our modern expectation of health is and it turns into something absolutely unique and phenomenal. And what he says, I'll kind of shorten it a little bit because he can be somewhat pedantic, but what he does say is that in the healthy condition of man, the spiritual voice, or that vital force, otherwise known as the dynamis, is unbounded. It retains all of its parts in a way that is harmonious, and it helps the person so that they can freely employ their bodies, their minds, and their souls for the highest purpose of existence. And so wonderment to me is in reference to you, Glenn, you, Rose, all of our listeners out there being in such a state of health that they can do what their highest purpose is in obliging wonderment, where people look upon that and say, this is absolutely amazing. How can I have that? How can I achieve that?
Yeah, hospitals will be very different places.
Oh, absolutely. If the expectations changed from an absence of disease or an absence of symptomology model to a presence of wonderment model.
Mm. Mm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thinking about that, what I loved about that is it brings in a lot of purpose to somebody's life. And I think that's, for health, that's such a big deal, is when we truly feel in touch with that, whether our bodies are able or not. But that vital energy that you just spoke of, when we're in touch with that and we feel like we're here for this is the mission, and let me live it out as greatly as I can. And that being the demarcation for whether I'm healthy or not, it takes us beyond just wanting to feel good in our bodies and takes us into, if my mission is this in life, what could I do, whether it's emotional or mental or physical, to get me to that next level, right? To let me express this in the world at that next whatever it is for me. So I think that's one of the most beautiful ways of thinking about health I think that I've ever thought of, or I've ever heard. So thank you. That was, I think, right there. That's taking us out of that zone.
Yeah.
We're going in there already. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I love that it brings into play existential thought, because so many people are so boggled down by just pure survival that we don't get to explore existentialism. And by existentialism, I'm referring to exactly what you said, Rose, those things of like, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of death? What is isolation and loneliness as opposed to community, connectivity, and that incredible state of empowerment and wonderment? And so health, in my mind, should include all of these variables, and not just looking at a disease-based model of how are the red blood cells, is the kidney function test in a state of normalcy, are the psychotic hallucinations gone, but rather going beyond that and helping that person start to explore what I call the meat of life in a process, not just looking at the end goal of, now I've achieved enlightenment and wonderment, but rather, what is the process by which I'm going through that? And so it's a processing-based exploration that health can offer us a platform for.
It seems like there's a confusion or maybe that we're treated in a harsher way. Well, we're treated in a non-vital way, because often when we break down or we're treated in a mechanistic way, that we're kind of a machine, and we break down, we need this medication.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I ever had a doctor actually ever mention vitalness.
Mm-hmm.
So like I remember when I was a kid, we had boils or something, and I remember that was like you got an antibiotic and you did this thing, but no one ever spoke of something. It was never spoken there was anything else other than you just kind of did this thing, and you went to the pharmacy, and hopefully you wouldn't get it again.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no another way of expressing. You might go to a concert and say, well, that was vital. But very rarely was there a moment where someone said, oh, that's inside of you, and you can become unblocked, and that may even affect your health. And like I realized there was a disconnection. Other than that, my only connection I remember, I think I had plantar warts, I think when I was 17. and my dermatologist prescribed desiccated liver. And I remember chasing down the Mr. Softee truck to get orange soda to take down my big liver pills. But I had no connection. It was kind of like supplements seemed like you did this. It was weird at the time to take supplements, it seemed. But I remember my Planters went away. But he didn't say to me, well, you're in this vital system. We want to feed the system. And then also the vital system, it eliminates or it detoxifies or it purifies. And you don't have to maybe even get the disease that's in your family line. Like there was a whole bunch of questions that were never answered other than, I think Jack LaLanne in his 90s said his father passed away at 50, but he didn't think the way his father thought. He didn't eat the way he did. Like all of a sudden I realized it changes our life when we think, well, we have the ability to actually tap into something and remove some of these obstructions. It changes everything, really. It's a game changer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You're making me reflect upon with what you're saying, Glenn. You're making me remember a patient that I worked with once. And if you don't mind, I'd like to share the story with you because I really think it's emphasizing exactly what you're describing. And so I'll change a few of the details just to protect her identity. But so we're going to say she's like a 50-year-old female. And she came into my office and she had an autoimmune disorder. And so her goal was to get rid of the symptoms. The autoimmune disorder was characterized by she had lots of little tumors all over her body. And so her immune system was attacking her own body tissues and it was causing them to form tumors and break down. She was very sick. And so she came to me with the goal of treating this. And so through the process, she was really open and willing to start exploring what the symptoms actually meant. And I did a little bit of counseling with her. And interestingly, what we found when we went back through her life and went back to when all of this began is she had grown up in a very difficult household with a father who was overly critical and very quite abusive. And so she would help him with his job doing paperwork. And if she didn't do it correctly, he would literally take her and throw her across the room. He was very physically, emotionally abusive. And then years later when he passed away, she took over that self-flagellation in his place. And so what we discovered and what she discovered throughout our time together is that the emotional abuse that she was inflicting upon herself actually started to manifest in a way where her body started to attack itself, or she developed the autoimmunity. And of course, this is theory, but the interesting thing that came from that is that the actual emotional discoveries that she was making correlated with subsequent improvements that we were able to see on labs and imaging. And so with treatment, we were doing mind-body treatment concomitant to homeopathy. She actually got well, the tumors went away, and her autoimmune markers went down. And so the phenomenal thing is what you were describing, Glenn, is the way that we relate to ourselves, the way we think, the way we talk, is going to very much impact the way that our bodies can exist and function. And so sometimes the body will cry tears that the eyes cannot. And symptoms can help us actually foster awareness and find meaning. And this was something that she hadn't even been aware of as a connection. And so I just wanted to describe that story because autoimmunity is prevalent in our culture. And it just makes me wonder if there are listeners who may be dealing with something similar, and it may be valuable to start that process of awareness and exploration in their life.
You know, as you told that story, I was just moved to say that I don't think, not that there's a lot of people that don't want to do that kind of internal work, but that kind of internal work is very difficult and scary and places in the psyche that people don't want to go, right? It's so much easier just pop a pill, feel better, and move along with your day instead of actually going inward to do all of this soul work, which of course then is reflected in your body. So I can see where there's a lot of resistance, particularly because we don't teach this sort of thing. It's not a concept that we grow up with. It's not something that we teach children. Oh, well, yeah, you have to kind of look inward if you're having physical problems, and that's just the way it is. Like, you have to deal with your stuff. And I think we live right now in a culture where we promote to the highest degree not dealing with your stuff. You know, you have any, whether it's a physical symptom or an emotional symptom, you know, you're feeling depressed, you're feeling down, whatever the case may be, it's something there that you have to look into. There's a reason for it. And the longer you don't look into it, the more it's going to manifest in these negative ways. So I think just to acknowledge that for a lot of people, that's a really scary thing to even venture into. So this patient that you had, I think, was remarkable and brave enough to go through and to heal.
I admired her so much because I can tell you, in my own story, I've had anxiety in the past, and for someone to say you can take this medicine and the anxiety will go away, or we can open up this closet that you've been ignoring for, you know, your entire life, and your anxiety could get worse. And I don't have a guarantee of the outcome, but it could oblige wonderment. What are you going to do? Can tell you that's a really hard decision when you're already suffering so much. You know, it's one thing when you're in a state of balance and a state of comfort to go through that closet, but it's another thing if you're already really suffering and you don't feel that you have the resources to do that. Yeah, so you're right. She was a really special, special person, and her story had a fantastic ending, but it's not an easy journey to embark on.
There's the homeopathy. Maybe share about the homeopathy, because the homeopathy helped her to mobilize innately. In other words, it kind of tapped her into her vital force. And so I think what makes internal work so difficult is that it's almost like the trauma comes up, and then people don't know what to do with it, whereas homeopathy would help her release some of the trauma.
Yes, yeah, I'm absolutely in love with homeopathy because it helps empower the person to achieve their goals of health and wellness. And it does it in a way by stimulating your body's natural ability to heal, as opposed to actually causing a chemical change. And so the analogy I often use with my patients is that when you're in a state of health, you're in a state of balance. And so it's like a tree, you know, trees, especially palm trees, are really flexible. You know, in Arizona here, yesterday we had a massive monsoon storm, and the trees that ended up losing branches and breaking were the trees that were more rigid. And the palm trees, they just swayed and they bent, and then today they're all fine and upright again because they had that flexibility. But, you know, having that's really important. And so what homeopathy does is it actually will help increase the body's resiliency, like a palm tree, to be able to shift and bend and move. And it can actually make you more resilient. And I see this because I do homeopathy and I do counseling, especially EMDR, which is a form of counseling where we use bilateral stimulation. It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And I find that when my patients are responding to their remedies, they're able to go through the EMDR process much more easily. They don't get stuck, versus those patients who aren't using the homeopathic treatments and are just doing the therapy. Sometimes it could be a lot more difficult. It's kind of like when you wake up in the morning, if you've had a horrible night of sleep and your body aches and you're exhausted and you're groggy and you're achy, and then you're driving to work and someone cuts you off. The way that you respond may not be the same as if you had an amazing night of sleep and a great breakfast and you feel really happy and your favorite song was on the radio and someone cuts you off. And so in one example, your body and your health and your mind are in a better place versus the other. And homeopathy can help shift you into that better place, by which you can, you know, achieve healing much more easily.
I was moved like Rose. I was thinking about people that I know who, they're in the basement. They're in a place where you could feel the good people. You could feel this goodness, but then you know that they have something they're carrying, and to hear someone go through the other side, it's so inspiring and meaningful to hear and to see her body shift, you know, like wow, it just I guess it's this idea that we get, you know, we have it like we have one act and the second act, but really there's this third wave or this other energy that really we don't got to stay in the stagnant march to death. That really and the story about her is so beautiful because now she has a life. She's not suppressed the symptoms, doesn't push them down, and she has a new body. It sounds like she's aware. It sounds like she has a new life and she's ready to live a better life. That's a wondrous thing. They don't say that on the drug commercials. You never hear that on the side effects, right? They never say, and after this blood in your urination, you can go to the park and enjoy your dog. They never talk ever about that. Matter of fact, it's one of the weirdest phenomenons. And everybody's smiling and shaking their heads, yes, but there's a yes in your story. There's no yes in the other, in the let's poison or suppress this story.
Yeah. I have another story I can share with you. I love stories because I feel like patient success stories show that what we're talking about can be taken from theory and conversation, and we can actually see how it can work and how it can manifest. And so I'll share with you another story if you don't mind. This is a man who came to see me because he was referred by one of my other patients, and he had a lot of respiratory and digestive issues. And he had been dealing with these issues for 30 years or more, and his family members had been treating them for a long time, and they asked if I would take his case and try to treat him homeopathically. And so it's interesting, as we did, there's a technique called a flow back technique where you can look and say, okay, when did this start? So let's flow back to that very initial memory. And so we started to explore it. And interestingly, all of his symptoms started when he emigrated to the United States when he was 4. And so we said, okay, well, what does that emigration have to do with your respiratory issues? Is it a change in the food? Is it a change in the diet? Is it a change in environmental exposure? And so what he ended up doing was we did a mind-body technique where we put him back in that state and allowed his younger self to express what they were experiencing at that time. So it's very meditative, almost like hypnosis, where you just go back, be in that state, and allow that part to speak. And what it turned out is that there was an incredible amount of deep-seated anger and a feeling of neglect by the parents for taking him away from everything that he had known back in Europe, bringing him here. And with that anger, he started to develop all of these physical symptoms. And then while we were actually doing that process, his body started to exhibit the symptoms in my office. He had some difficulty breathing, his stomach started hurting. And so we worked with that. And so interestingly, he developed bronchitis after we did that session, but it was bronchitis by symptomology and not diagnostically. Like there was no sputum culture showing an infection. It was very interesting. It was very likely what we call fictitious disease, or an acute flare of what we say a latent sora. And I could spend a lot of time getting into that, but perhaps more for a future session together. And so he started to manifest old symptoms that had been suppressed with steroid medications. And once we got through that, while continuing to heal that anger and resolve these underlying issues, it's been 6 months and he hasn't had anything come up since then, and which is absolutely remarkable for him because he was exhibiting stomach pain every day of the week that was preventing him from functioning and working. And so going back to that initial root cause of that emotional upset, we were able to help him resolve that issue. And, it took a lot of digging, but the cool thing is that while he was really ill and these symptoms are flaring up, he emotionally felt so much better. And normally you think, well, I have bronchitis, I feel terrible. But for him, it's like, I feel oddly good. Like I can't really breathe that well, but I feel good. Like I feel like something is moving, which is a very interesting thing I hear a lot from patients is even if they feel worse while going through that closet, emotionally, they're in a better place.
That's such a huge uncommon distinction that Right. That's very beautifully said. That's such a unique thing about, well, about what you do in homeopathy, that you're in touch with. Maybe it's the will to live, or what would you call it? What would you call the thing that they're that? Well, what I think about the will to live, the sense of optimism, maybe a sense of the storm is clearing. How would you say about it?
It's different for everybody.
Yeah.
For the last patient, is he was a fighter. He refused to remain sick, and he tried everything else and came to me as a last resort.
Mm.
He tried the medicine, he tried to do what the commercials say, but he wanted to walk his dog at the park, like you said, Glenn. He wanted to feel better. And so for him, it was just sheer stubbornness, like a refusal to lie down and give up. And the patient that I described before that is she had this sense inside of her that there was more, that there was more to life than she had been living, and she didn't know what that was, what it looked like, but it was this like something inside of her that she couldn't quite put her finger on, said just keep going, keep going.
Yeah, I was just tapping into something, Nicole and Rose, that it's such a I know what it is. I really love. I was just listening to a study with Dr. Susan Love. So she wrote this book, Hold Me Tight, and so she came up with this idea that the old research on bonding and attachments is outdated. And they just did a study where she showed in 20 weeks doing this specific brain exercise, the brain of divorcing women changed. And when they kind of test them, they loved their husband again in ways that was unknown to them. So what I find really interesting and inspiring and engaging is how that's an interesting phenomenon, because a lot of people just kind of live in the drift. They kind of get into being in a collapse. It's not really an acceptance, but it's a collapse. And I realize a lot of people kind of approach life in collapse. So they don't really have a sense of. It happened to my father, actually. He kind of, at a certain point, he couldn't move forward, and he just kind of went to bed. Then maybe he went to bed the next 30 years. And I remember he pretty much, and then his body reflected the collapse. So it was kind of, and yet he was really smart. That was the paradox.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something about that. I mean, that's why I'm inspired. Part of what Rose wants to do is go back to the Caribbean and teach people how to become more abundant, independent of a tourism-driven economy. So you think to yourself, well, that's such a huge thing that people could have another sense of something rather than resign and collapse, and that you're saying that as they rebound, it's not a temporary thing, but in some sense they're accessing bigger life. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, we gotta relanguage or re-explore what big health is then. Mm-hmm. Because it isn't just battling a symptom, because clearly if the symptom went away, it couldn't explain this other quality of liveliness or aliveness or vitalityness. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just an interesting, it's a different conversation. I guess what I'm curious for the people watching is kind of like, well, that's really an interesting thing to question how alive you could be. And really, because it's a new medicine then. It's a new so Rose, how was the second story for you?
Brilliant, because I think the whole thing that we're talking about here takes the conversation of what is healthy and what it is that we're even going to the doctor for to a whole new level. And the idea that we can use our bodies and our emotional and physical symptoms as a demarcator and a doorway into even better. It's not like, okay, I start here and then I got sick and then I dropped down here and then my best hope is to get here again.
Yes, yeah.
Really, it's really the bigger hope is that you drop down here because it's telling you something, and it's actually a signal that maybe you can grow a little bit more and you can live a little bit more. and you want to go back to the doctor and have whatever it is that you do, and you want to be up here, right? That's your next level. So I think if we look at symptoms as almost this indicator for us of growth, like, oh, I'm feeling kind of crappy again. Something's showing up for me. That means maybe I'm stuck and it's time for me to grow. Rather than how we normally see it and conceptualize it as, I was feeling great, now I feel like crap, I'm sick, I have cancer, I have whatever it is that I have, and I'm going to die. Like, there's not even any hope of getting this to where you used to be. That's like the big hope. But it's more like, well, now let's just avoid death. So, so I think reframing it to look at it like, well, maybe you're actually just getting symptoms because it's time for you to be even bigger health if you really track this back and solve this correctly. I mean, that just turns everything upside down of what we know. And I think you can look at it in a more beautiful way, in a more hopeful, positive way, which is, of course, what your body and your mind needs to kick in everything your body needs to do any kind of real healing. So it's a great perspective. So I kind of want to turn the conversation a little bit back to what we started with and go back to the idea of a symptom, and maybe talk about what is a symptom, when should we pay attention to it, what is it that we're looking for, and what could it mean?
I love that. And so interestingly, Merriam-Webster has two definitions of a symptom, and the first is a change in the body or mind indicating that a disease is present or something bad exists. So the second definition is it's a sign of something bad, which is basically the exact opposite of what our conversation today is about. And so, you know, if you grow up with this idea in mind, I have a symptom, I have a disease, this is something bad, of course you're going to go to your doctor and be like, remove this, take this symptom away from me, this is an indication of something bad, as opposed to what you were saying, Rose, is the symptom, there's a message in that symptom, and that message can help me live my best life. And I love analogies because I think that analogies can help people think of a concept a lot more kind of clearly. And so one thing I often like to discuss is in the early 20th century, miners would take canary birds down into their mines to warn them of potential disasters. Are you guys familiar with this?
Yes.
Yeah, and so what would happen is the mines would be filled with carbon monoxide, which is a deadly gas. You can't smell or taste it, and that can form underground. And what was happening is miners were dying, and so they would bring either a mouse or this little canary down there, and the canary would you know, if there's any signs of something wrong, like they were in distress, they couldn't breathe, or they died, then the miners could get out. And so our symptoms are like little canaries that can indicate there's something that's not quite right. And if we can pay attention to those canaries, we can make change before something more serious occurs. And so the canaries, it's a blessing. It's a wonderful thing. And it increases awareness. And when we have a symptom, in homeopathy, what Hahnemann says is a symptom is the untunement of the vital force. The vital force is what we've been talking about during this conversation, of that inherent ability to heal yourself, that piece inside of you that says there's something more, that thing that drives you forward. And so awareness of the untunement of the vital force, again, awareness of that symptom or that imbalance, can lead us down a path of enlightenment. It can illuminate the reality that the absence of disease is not health, but rather that the presence of health can help us achieve wonderment. And so the goal is to understand that your symptoms are your saving grace. Your symptoms are your blessing. Your symptoms are your gift of life. Your symptoms are your gift of hope, of becoming not just here, the status quo, but elevating beyond what you ever imagined being capable of feeling, being, doing, contributing, experiencing. And so your symptoms can foster awareness so that you can move into uncharted territory where you can make a difference It's the best gift that you can give yourself. It's the best gift that you can give those around you, is by taking that perspective from Merriam-Webster and flipping it upside down and saying, my symptoms are my blessing, they're my tool, and I'm going to take these, I'm going to harness these, and I'm going to fight. I'm going to move forward into uncharted territory because I refuse to accept the status quo. I refuse to be sick. I want to get well, and not only do I want to get well, I want people to look at me in wonderment as an inspiration for themselves.
Mm. That was a beautiful progression of wondrous awareness.
I'm passionate about this.
Yeah, no, it comes across. I just makes me want to see you again. Like it inspires me. It inspires me to see past what because initially I'm still watching. I had an interaction the other day with a family member, and I was like, it was hard. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, listening to you, it reminds me of the opportunity to have a deeper connection, because the symptoms telling me that there's another relational system, there's another possibility of more loving connection. Mm-hmm. And I realize I see it in the culture around us. I just see, we're so black and white about things. It's either it's bad, it's wrong, it's not this, it's ending, and it's, we have a kind of a non-invitational way of, like, usually it takes patience. I guess that what I appreciate about what this method, how you work with people, Nicole, is that it takes patience to let the cork rise. Like, it's almost like an inquiry, and that's very different than how we see medicine or health. We think, okay, what pill? And you're kind of saying that this patience, or this vital patience, that it comes up in ways that's beyond sometimes our intellect or the way we've been trained. Yes. And so it's like, I guess the system itself is a very honoring, compassionate, in tune system. It's very honoring to the patient. It's very honoring of a process that's beyond, that's beyond really hurting. It's a non-hurtful system. It's a system that's kind of like, wow, there's something here. It's very brilliant. It's very, I guess, the implications of being in a family that way. Because no matter where you would be in your family system, someone in the system would say to you, hey, this is a symptom, and let's explore that, rather than you're garbage, you're no good, or it's always going to be this way. That's a death sentence. Like, if you think about the feedback system, mm-hmm. I did meet a woman who came to see me, wrote a book called Your Brain Believes Every Word You Speak. Or your brain hears every word you speak. And she healed herself of a brain injury, and she just started talking to her brain. Mm-hmm. And rather than we have the education that our body's outside of us, it doesn't have this consciousness, we're not able to access it, we got to go to someone outside. It just seems like such a beautiful thing that you're participating with someone, more like a piece of art or something, rather than you're doing something, you're kind of attuning and then giving them this very unique medicine. What makes homeopathy a unique medicine?
Well, what I love about what you're saying about the woman with the brain injury and about homeopathy is it takes the dependence away from the people around you, and it puts the empowerment back in the person. Because so many of us are trained that we are not enough, that we don't have the answers. Trust your doctor. The medicine is going to help. This is going to help. If you do this diet, you're going to feel great. If you follow my program, you're going to feel great. But what makes homeopathy different, and what that woman you were describing, what's different is that you can heal yourself. Just like if I wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to have a terrible day, I will. Or if I have a patient who's like, if I eat this food, I'm going to get sick, and they tell themselves that constantly, I see time and time again that they do. They start to experience what their brain is telling them they're going to experience. And just like in the reverse, you can actually change your body. And I told this story when we were together last time, but I'll tell it again quickly, is there were two women, and they were both diagnosed at the same time with lupus. Glenn, do you remember this story?
I love the story, yes.
I'll share it to our listeners and to Rose. And so they were diagnosed with lupus around the same time. It would have been a great study because they were both in their mid-30s and they were from the same area. And they went to the doctor. He's a homeopath. And he was giving them both, and they didn't know each other. He's giving them both well-prescribed medicines. And interestingly, one of the women got well and one of the women did not. And the doctor's racking his brain and he can't figure out what's going on so that one of his patients wasn't achieving success. And one day at the end of their session, she was his last client, and he walked her to the door and he watched to make sure she got to her car safely. And he saw her get in and pull away, and the solution became quite apparent to him. And when he saw her car pull out of the spot, he noticed on her license plate, "Lupus me." Lupus me. And so she had identified so much with having that disease. Her brain had told her that she had this disease to such a degree that she would put it on her license plate, served as an obstacle to cure in her case. Mm-hmm. And I wish I could tell you how the story ends because my mentor, he did not share that. But I think the implications are absolutely fascinating about the sense of empowerment. And so going back to your original question, homeopathy, what can homeopathy do? Is homeopathy can help. It helps stimulate your body to heal itself. Your body will heal itself. The remedy doesn't heal you, but your body heals itself. But homeopathy can't undo, or it can't necessarily treat what messages you're giving yourself. So active participation is necessary. Just like that woman I was telling you about with the autoimmune disease who had been hating herself all these years, the homeopathic remedy helped her get into a state of better vitality. Her body was starting to move and shake and shed and heal, but she also had to work on how she was speaking to herself and the messages that she'd been giving to herself all those years. And so homeopathy is absolutely powerful. It's absolutely empowering and effective, but it has to be combined with the person's relationship with the self and that fostering of awareness and that conversation about what they expect from themselves. Do I expect complacency, or am I willing to step out of the zone of reliable performance, out of my comfort zone, into the zone of proximal development, that zone where we start to grow and expand and stretch outside of our norm?
I want to go back for a second to the idea of awareness, especially, thinking of symptoms, because I think we're taught that at the first moment that even something wrong comes into our sphere of awareness, we shut it down, right? Oh, I have a pain in my knee. Let me go take a Tylenol. I have this. I got to go fix it. So if you could just speak to that for a minute about what it means to actually tune into yourself and first have maybe a baseline of what is normal for you at this point, so that when a symptom does come up, it's quickly and easily recognized and not ignored or pushed aside, and the importance of not ignoring it.
I love that. That is brilliant. And so one thing that I like to have my patients do is I like to have them write their biography. And the reason for that is because Dr. Epstein is one of my mentors, and he coined the phrase, your biography becomes your biology. And it's brilliant because if you start to understand your biography, who you think you are as far as your identity of self, your identity with your family system, your identity with your body and your bodily experiences, and then what those mean, it can actually start to create a system of empowerment and change. I have a young woman that I work with, and she has post-traumatic stress disorder, which has resulted in something called depersonalization or dissociation. And so she's very, very ill. And anytime when we started working together, she got a little bit triggered, she would depersonalize. And what that looked like is she would emotionally and mentally leave her body, and she could see herself floating above her body. And her body would be in a comatose state where she couldn't get out of it. And this could last for days. Oh. And so one thing that she did with our work together is she journaled all the time. She did her biography, but she wrote down her experiences and she processed, okay, I'm having this shoulder pain. What is my shoulder pain telling me? What does this mean? And the great part about this is that when she came in to see me, I was able to prescribe a homeopathic remedy for her where she was more stable and she dissociated much, much less. And that created space for her to look at that shoulder pain in a way where she felt more safe. And she was actually coming in each visit and telling me what this meant and how it went away when she identified that. And she had seen chiropractors and acupuncturists, and all she was doing was becoming aware of her symptoms, journaling about it, processing it. And then the body didn't need to express that symptom anymore. It was, oh, thank you. It's resolved. I don't need to express this. Mm. And so as far as awareness, write your biography, write down what your life is, what it means to you, your symptoms. Well, what could your symptom mean? And engage in that process of exploration. Write down your core beliefs. Take time to ask yourself difficult questions. For example, what are my wants? What are my needs? Do I feel like these are getting met? Often our wants and needs tell us something is missing. Ask yourself, how can I live my best life if something is missing? Or if I got a magic pill and all my problems and limitations disappeared, what would that look like? If I had no problems, no health problems, no family problems, what would I be doing with my life? Ask yourself these difficult questions. And the fascinating thing is your body is going to respond to that, whether or not you're even aware of that. Just like my patient who had the respiratory and the digestive issues. He had no idea there was a link. But once he started exploring it, his body honored that. And he got well.
Wow, I love what you're saying, because you're coming at so many questions that I use with my own clients. Because I don't come at it from the health perspective, but I come at it often from the career and mission perspective. So I always tell them, what would you do with your life if you didn't need money and everything that you needed to survive was provided? So you had food, water, shelter. Now what would you do with yourself? And to be honest, most people never ask themselves that question. They're so involved in the money game and how do I survive, that when you open it up, I've seen people completely just shut down because they couldn't even bring themselves to put themselves in the scenario of not having to have a job, for money, for food, for all these things. So I love that you're doing the same line of questioning, but with health. You know, they're coming to you with something's wrong with their health, and you're saying, all right, now how would you live if this was gone, if you had all the health in the world? So I feel like you and I were coming like at the same the same basic vital idea, just from different perspectives. So I have a deep appreciation for the work that you're doing.
And I love working with Glenn in particular too, because he takes these concepts and then he says, well, what is the meaning? And Glenn, I hope it's okay that I'm, kind of talking about what my perspective is of what you're doing, sure. But you take these things and you say, what is the meaning of this? And so when we have all of these, getting our ducks in a row, fostering that awareness, I love, Rose, that you're coming at this from a different angle, because we're speaking the same language, and more people that hear this contextualized may start to change the way that they're looking at their life and their health, and then, going into vibrant living and finding meaning. And so taking this one step farther, and Glenn, you do this with such equanimity, is we're transitioning beyond ourself in order to find meaning. So, Glenn, you do this with your deep connection with people, doing podcasts like this, reaching out and serving others and serving the community, because that is so important as a fundamental part of this entire conversation, is changing the focus away from the self and then focusing on the community and connection. And so it's where we're able to look at something larger than me, larger than the I, whether it's spirituality, a meditative practice, yoga, volunteering with children or animals, whatever that is that makes you feel connected. And I would even go farther and say what makes you feel connected into the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious, for our listeners who aren't familiar with that, is a term used in psychodynamic psychotherapy. And one of my favorite practitioners of that is Carl Jung. And he talks about the collective unconscious as this place that everyone is connected, as everyone digs into that. It's where deja vu comes from. It's where when you have a feeling about someone you love and you call them and they needed you in that moment, it's where we're uniting existentially as a human, animal, tree, nature, being, race. And so getting outside of the self and then focusing on other people, oftentimes that can be the most powerful and therapeutic thing that you can do for your wellness. So I love, Rose, that you're talking about that. And Glenn, I admire so much how that's what you're doing with this mission of vibrant living and all these things that you're driving towards. And I want to thank you for providing us a platform to have this conversation, and also to provide a platform for other people to perhaps be inspired to dig into community and connection, because the more that this message is spread, just imagine what we can do to transform our community, the world, life at large. It has so many implications.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, thank you. You know, what's great, Nicole, about you and Rose is I feel like you're talking about the collective unconscious. Yeah, I feel like I've had deep bonds and relational connections. It was almost like I knew you both. I had recognition of you both, and then there you were. And to feel that, it goes back to Einstein's thing about, you know, the most fundamental question you could ask is the universe a friendly place to be? Mm-hmm. And then feeling this sense of confirmation, and because otherwise, you know, we live in doubt. To feel recognition and to feel that at this deeper level, I guess in some ways I've always felt like when I was 10 or 12, like I couldn't understand why people, I remember thinking, how do people divorce? I couldn't quite get the concept. Didn't make sense. And now I kind of feel like, yeah, something happens, and I guess that just having this conversation, in some ways, it opens up something, because I think we're riveted in a conversation of the content, the problem, the cloud. So this conversation has a different context, a different way of seeing and potentially participating, and I love that. I mean, of course I think about you sitting with people, and I think about those moments in my life. I remember once I was running a health food store, and the refrigerator repairman, he was just crying a lot when he was working on the machine, and I remember interacting with him because I had a few ideas about vitamins that might help him. But really, what it was is I was relating to him, and it came out of himself. Mm-hmm. And I remember the owner of the store said to me, "Oh, that's great, you sold the vitamins," but really he missed what was relevant. What was relevant was I did connect with him, and there was a third space that opened. Something happened, and I part of my day, like as you were talking, I was thinking how I began this morning. I was kind of I was a little stuck this morning, and I realized when that opens. And my focus opens, something else occurs, and to have a conversation, like right now, people could be watching this, and for the first time, they could be questioning their pills, right? They take the pills every day, or they could be questioning the harshness of their voice. And these are subtle, but they have such power. So it's kind of like, and sometimes I don't know how things occur. I mean, on the holiday weekend, Memorial Day, I called this in. It was a beautiful, beautiful. It's called the Apple Tree. I meant to actually acknowledge them. It's right by Jacob's Pillow, and it's right by Capallo. It's a beautiful inn. And I called, and I told them about what I do. Like really in seconds, I told them I'm a travel journalist, but I'm a lot about what happens to people when they enter a third space, a place that's different than home and work. And I thought this woman didn't hear me at all. You know, it was very funny. I spoke to her, and she says, "Okay," and I said, "Yeah," and I said, "Usually." So she calls me back, and she says, "The owner just wants to have you." She goes, "There's no charge." And of course, I thought she didn't, I always thought it was a missing. So there's moments in life where something occurs beyond what our inclination is, what we assumed. And these are moments that I think open up a whole new life. And I guess they're very moving. They seem very real. So it's kind of like, imagine someone coming to you and what they really want is a prescription, right? They really want this prescription. And it almost surprises them that the process, imagine letting down so much that the process of the interaction opens them up so they could receive something different in life. And that's, because I realize there's something so magical about that I'm still, I don't know, I'm still in awe of it. I'm still, curious about it. Kind of like when I was curious, I went to my daughter, she showed me she had a screening of her TV shows. And during this interaction, she told me the owner of the house had a Great Dane. And I was so excited about the Great Dane, but the owner of the house, it was a very funny interaction. She might have been a little drunk that day. And she took me to this room, and I remember being in this room with her and the Great Dane. It was like the Great Dane's bedroom, pretty affluent Great Dane. And the Great Dane was running around, and the woman was telling me this poem about Great Danes. And I just remember kind of like there was something kind of magical and awkward and funny about it at the same time. Because I thought, all of a sudden, I'm in this room, this Great Dane could kill me. All of a sudden, she continues telling me the poem about Great Danes. And I realized, like, wow, there's so much that, in some sense, we don't know. And to defer to anxiety, which I guess I kind of learned and it became natural. And now there's this other thing, this kind of vital awareness of this other place to kind of go to. Mm-hmm. And if you think about how that might change our brain, like it's really inspiring. So as people are watching us and questioning, I mean, that's really why I want to do a movie around this, the unscripted power of the movie. I really want to see what happens when people are at the base of the mountain together, they become unblocked. How would they climb and be together if they knew that each moment, that the things we share are the most powerful, sometimes they're the most subtle. Mm-hmm. So I'm inspired by this. I want you to know it's helping me remind me of the gift of symptoms. Because I want to say that in my cycle, sometimes I don't like symptoms. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or the idea there might be a symptom coming down the road.
Yeah. Well, and what I really want to touch on that I love that you said, Glenn, is one is that the connection was the most important thing that you offered that man. And I love that you were willing and able to take the time to offer him that. I think that's beautiful. And so the connection is what heals. Carl Rogers was a huge proponent of that. Carl Rogers is a famous psychotherapist, and he was all about unconditional positive regard and the therapeutic alliance. And so I think connection is key. It goes back to that going beyond fostering awareness and going into community and connection and transitioning beyond the self. And there is something challenging that will emerge that is important for our listeners to be prepared for. And I think it would be valuable for us to do a conversation about this, is what do you do when you have moved beyond the flat earth? And so the flat earth is it's a term coined by Dooley. And Dr. Dooley wrote the book Beyond Flat Earth. And what he's referencing is when we live on a flat earth, we see things in a certain way. And then, Glenn, what you were describing is an entire new dimension of being, a new dimension of looking at things, changing the face of symptoms from something bad, according to Merriam-Webster, and changing it and converting it into something empowering and beautiful. And then what happens after you've made that transformation, because now you're no longer in a flat earth in yourself, but you're existing in a flat earth in our culture. And so what do you do when that transformation has occurred? There's so many stories. There's a wonderful, I think his name is Alexander Shia, and he talks about the Camino. And the Camino is a hike that people can do where they go from one end of the continent, they go through Spain, and they go all the way up to the other end. And this is this old hike that people have been doing for thousands of years. And it's purported to be enormously powerfully conversional, where people find themselves, they change, they are enlightened. But the hardest part is when they return back home after that.
Yeah.
And all of the rules have changed. And so what do you do? How do you maintain that? And so you have this new perspective. Okay, I don't like the anxiety, but I know that it's a good thing. I know I'm working through it. But then you go home and your family's like, why don't you just take Ativan? Or your doctor's like, why, you're worse? Why, what is your doctor doing? How do you exist in a flat earth? How do you come back from the Camino when you've been transformed? And I think that the answer to that would require more time than we have today, but I think it's really worth putting a bug in our
I think we actually can dive into that on our next format. I think that's a really good. As a matter of fact, what you just brought up is something that it used to be people go to a seminar during a weekend and they come back and they'd be high for a few days and they crash because it was almost like they had a little opening and then all of a sudden life's like this again. So yeah, no, I think that, to live integrally, to kind of bring this awareness and make it relational, and I think that's huge. I'd love to get into that as our part two.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
So Rose, I'm going to defer to you since you're so into vital relating, and I love. By the way, I really felt how you were moved so much with Nicole's story, about the girl. I really felt it. It really moved you so deeply. It moved me that you were moved.
Yeah, I know so much about this conversation. It's gone much deeper than what I expected, which is nice. I mean, we've gone into the collective unconscious, and I think that's where it's great because that's where my work is, and it's hard to explain what it is that I do sometimes. Unless someone has experienced a little bit of that for themselves and that shift in perspective, because everything that I'm doing is on that level. It's very hard to translate it into this flat earth, right? This plane.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm doing. So I think moving into that next conversation about when you have this new perspective, how do you come back? What do you do with it? What are the practices that you can do within yourselves to not shift back? And to not get kind of slaughtered in the meantime, emotionally as well. I think that's an amazing conversation. So the next show will be, I'm really looking forward to that one too.
Me too. And I want to thank Yaya Organics for, I decided to put this in our healing line at all levels. Because I realized that as we kind of finish this segment, that a lot of people don't know what to do after a crisis, that something like Lyme, even when you come back and you feel healthy, it's kind of like it's shaking your world. So I'd love to kind of pick up with that. And it's huge. It's huge. And I'm inspired, by the way, of the listening in depth that we all share today. It's hard to I feel like I want to go to the next course with you both and continue. So I want to thank everybody for watching. I love your responses and your reflections or something you want to share with us. I want to leave today with the notion our life's precious, and we're going to continue right here and Beyond the Formula on the unscripted Power Television format. Thanks, Nicole.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me. And Rose.
Oh, tell people real quick how to reach you, how to be in touch with you.
Yes, you can learn more about me and my practice by going to www.drnicolecain.com, and that's DRNICOLECAIN.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm waiting for your coaching